Have you ever heard a story so unexpected, so quietly powerful, that it makes you pause mid-thought and question what truly keeps a human being alive? What if I told you that one of the most influential young princes in Saudi Arabia, a man guarded by the world's finest doctors, surrounded by cutting-edge machines and limitless resources, reached a point where none of it mattered? And the only person who knew what to do was a Filipino nurse. And what if the thing that pulled him back wasn't medicine, wasn't technology, wasn't anything you'd find in a medical manual? It sounds unbelievable, almost like something written for a movie. Yet this story, once you hear it, might forever change how you understand compassion, humility, and the quiet strength of Filipino caregivers across the globe. People picture royalty living far above ordinary struggles, golden halls, privilege, comfort, and a life insulated from anything harsh or real. But sickness does not kneel to crowns. It recognizes no status. And on one still evening in Riyadh, in a secure wing of one of the Middle East's most elite hospitals, a young Saudi prince known for his sharp mind and commanding presence found himself sinking into a dangerous place. Physically, yes, but emotionally even more. Doctors had exhausted every option. Experts had flown in from Europe and America. Sleek machines lined the room, blinking in restless patterns, tracking every fragile breath. The scent of antiseptic mixed with fatigue hung heavy in the air. Yet despite all the intervention, the prince's condition continued to decline. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in subtle, unsettling shifts that frightened the medical team more than any sudden emergency would. And then it happened. Something small, something quiet, something so human that it pulled the prince's personal physician away from the monitors. For the first time, he wasn't looking at numbers or scans. He was looking at the prince's eyes. Eyes that weren't filled with fear or pain, but with a deep, suffocating loneliness. That was when a Filipino nurse named Marcus stepped into the room. Marcus had joined the prince's care team only days earlier. A gentleman in his mid-40s, soft-spoken, humble, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. And without realizing it, he was about to do something that no machine or specialist could. The kind of person who blended into the background unless you truly paid attention. The kind of caregiver whose silence calmed a room more than another person's expertise. Most of the doctors didn't notice him at first. In a place filled with specialists boasting decades of training, a quiet Filipino nurse from another country didn't seem like the one who would make a difference. But that night changed everything. When Marcus stepped inside, the prince's eyelids fluttered, barely softly, like someone recognizing a presence he trusted without understanding why. Marcus greeted him just as he always did, gentle, steady, grounded. "Good evening, Your Highness, I'm here." That was all, no clinical instructions. No rushed explanations, just presence. And somehow those 4 simple words shifted the atmosphere. The monitors didn't show any sudden improvement. Yet every person in the room felt it. A tiny shockwave, subtle but undeniable. The prince reached out weakly, searching. Not for the doctor's hand, not for the specialists, for Marcus's. The physician hesitated. This wasn't in any treatment plan. No protocol in the world instructed a nurse to hold a royal patient's hand. No medical guide ever suggested that recovery might begin with something as small as human warmth. But Marcus understood what machines couldn't register. He stepped closer, bowed his head out of respect, and took the prince's trembling hand. And in that moment, something opened. Not in the body, but in the heart. Because what the prince needed most wasn't another medication or a stronger dosage. It was something he hadn't felt in months. Something no one on his team realized he was starving for. Something so simple, yet so rare in the world of power, titles, and rigid protocol. Human connection. And this is where the story truly begins. Before this night, Marcus had noticed details others overlooked. The way the prince stared at the covered window as if trying to see through it. The slight flinch every time a new specialist entered with a loud voice. The untouched meals, not from lack of hunger, but from lack of anyone asking what he wanted. Working in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, even briefly in Oman, Marcus had seen what illness does, how it erodes not just the body but the spirit. Years of caring for people fighting silent battles had taught him something medicine often forgets. Sometimes the real healing doesn't come from what you give the body, but what you give the soul. So as he stood holding the prince's frail hand, he asked a question no one had thought to ask. "Your Highness, would you like me to open the curtains?" A small question. Almost insignificant. But the prince blinked slowly, and for the first time since his decline began, a single tear slid down the side of his face. Marcus walked to the window and gently pulled the curtains aside. The desert night spilled into the room, soft, warm, golden. A silver moon hung low above the horizon like a quiet guardian, and the lights of Riyadh shimmered faintly in the distance, reminding him that life still existed beyond these cold hospital walls. The prince stared at the view, and little by little his breathing eased. Not healed, not stabilized, but softened. And in that quiet shift, Marcus understood something profound, something no specialist, no world-class doctor, no advanced machine had realized. The prince wasn't fading because of the illness alone. He was fading because of isolation. And the way back wasn't another medication or another emergency protocol. It was something deeply human. Something Marcus had grown up seeing in Filipino homes. Something he had carried quietly into every hospital room he ever stepped into. Care. Not the clinical kind, the human kind. That moment marked the beginning of a journey no one in that hospital, not even the kingdom itself, saw coming. The days that followed carried a strange, almost invisible tension through the private wing. Specialists moved in shifts, studying lab results, adjusting dosages, and preparing backup plans in case the prince deteriorated again. Yet there was something unspoken hanging in the air, a quiet awareness that for reasons nobody could fully explain, the prince reacted more to Marcus's presence than to any treatment. It wasn't that the doctors lacked skill. They were the best in the world. But even they couldn't ignore what the monitors displayed. Every time Marcus entered the room, the prince's vitals shifted. His heart rate leveled, his breathing deepened. The panic behind his eyes softened into peace. At first, some dismissed it. Coincidence, they insisted. Patients have highs and lows. But when the same pattern played out again and again, the head physician began watching more closely. One evening, after the team cleared out, he quietly stayed behind, observing from the corner. Marcus didn't even notice him. He was focused on adjusting the prince's pillow, his voice calm and warm as he narrated each movement, speaking as if guiding someone out of fear. "Your Highness, I'll move this just a little. Let me know if it feels better. No rush, no barking orders, no clinical detachment, just respect." The physician watched the prince relax under Marcus's careful hands, and for the first time in years he felt something unexpected. Humility. How could a simple nurse understand something an entire team of specialists had missed? The answer revealed itself soon after. That night the prince slipped into a wave of confusion and fear, a common complication of prolonged illness, but one that weighed heavily on the soul. He whispered something in Arabic over and over, half conscious, half pleading. The room felt suffocating, thick with a sadness that ran deeper than anything medical. Marcus leaned closer, listening. He didn't know the words, but he knew the pain behind them. And then he spoke, not in Arabic, not in English, but in the warm, soothing cadence of his own language. "Nandito lang po ako, Your Highness. Hindi ko po kayo iiwan. I am here. I'm not going anywhere." The head physician felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't nursing technique. This wasn't part of any medical protocol. This was something deeper, something reaching a place inside the prince that medicine couldn't touch. The prince's whispers slowed, his breathing steadied, his face softened, and then, barely audible under the hum of the machines, he whispered, "Do not leave." It was the first clear sentence he had spoken in 2 days. From that moment, the prince insisted on one thing: only Marcus. He asked for him every morning, waited for him every night. And whenever Marcus stepped away for a short break, the prince became restless, eyes fixed on the doorway, searching for the presence that anchored him to life. Some questioned it, others resisted. But there was no denying the truth. The prince improved more in 48 hours under Marcus's quiet presence than he had in 2 months of intensive treatment. There was something uniquely Filipino in the way Marcus cared, something cultural, instinctive, almost spiritual. It wasn't just about tasks or routines. It was the way he saw the prince not as royalty, not as a patient, but as a human being, and that humanity slowly unlocked doors in the prince's heart that had been sealed for years. That afternoon, as the desert sun cast a warm haze across the room, the prince finally spoke clearly. "You remind me," the prince whispered, voice trembling, "of someone I lost." Marcus paused. He didn't push, didn't pry. He simply waited, steady and patient the way he always did. "My mother," the prince continued, his throat tightening. "When I was a child, she would sit by my bedside. She never left me. Even when the palace needed her, even when the world wanted her attention, he swallowed hard. The memory hurt, but it was also the only thread he had left. You sit the same way she did. A soft ache bloomed in Marcus's chest, because this was a truth many never understood. Filipinos carry their families with them everywhere they go. Their kindness is shaped by years of watching over loved ones in the quiet hours of the night, by wiping brows, calming fears, and holding hands when words fall short. They know the purest form of caregiving, not as a skill but as a way of life. "Everyone here gives me treatment," the prince whispered, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. "But you give me peace." Those words struck the palace physician standing just outside the curtains. For the first time he realized the truth. They had been treating the prince's body while ignoring his spirit. They had fought the visible illness but not the invisible wounds, loneliness, fear, and silent sorrow. And only Marcus had seen it. As evening approached, Marcus did something small, almost insignificant, that would quietly become the turning point of everything. He took out a tiny speaker from his worn bag. Nothing fancy. The edges were scratched from years of use. He placed it beside the prince's bed and looked at him for permission. "May I play something for you, Your Highness? Something calming?" The prince managed a faint nod. Marcus pressed play. What filled the room wasn't classical music. It wasn't religious chanting. It wasn't medical therapy. It was a Filipino lullaby, a melody older than memory, the kind mothers hum to comfort their children when words no longer help. The prince closed his eyes, and for the first time in months he slept without medication. All night the medical team monitored his vitals in disbelief. His blood pressure steadied, his heartbeat smoothed, his oxygen levels rose, not dramatically but gently, like a body finally allowed to rest without fear gripping it. When the prince awoke, he looked at Marcus with a clarity they hadn't seen in weeks. "You brought me home," he whispered. 5 words, but they changed everything, because in that moment everyone finally understood. It wasn't medicine saving the prince. It was humanity. The thing Marcus carried not in his hands, but in his heart. And this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, an almost unbelievable transformation took place. The prince, once trapped in exhaustion and despair, began responding to life again. Not with miracles, but with the tiny awakenings Marcus knew so well from his years of caregiving. He ate again. He asked for water. He even requested the curtains be opened before Marcus arrived, as if preparing himself for the small rituals that had stitched hope back into his days. The palace physician watched with awe. What stunned him wasn't the improvement, but what caused it. A lullaby, a steady presence, a hand held without rush, gentle words in a language the prince didn't even understand. It defied every medical theory, yet revealed a truth they had all overlooked. The prince wasn't battling a physical illness alone. He was battling a collapse of spirit. One afternoon, as Marcus offered the prince a warm cup of tea, the head physician finally approached him. "What is it you are doing?" he asked softly, not accusing, but genuinely seeking to understand. "What do you see that we do not?" Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure he had an answer. But after a moment he spoke with the same sincerity he carried into every room. "I'm not doing anything extraordinary, doctor. I'm simply letting him know he's not alone." The physician blinked, as if hearing something so simple it felt profound. But it wasn't simple, not in a palace, not in a world where vulnerability is hidden behind protocol, where loneliness is disguised by power, where silence becomes a wound no one treats. The prince, surrounded by influence all his life, had been drowning long before his body began failing. That evening he made a request no one expected. "Marcus," he said gently, "tell me about your home." "My home, Your Highness?" "Yes," the prince whispered. "Tell me what it's like." No one had asked Marcus that in years. Abroad he was often seen only as a caregiver, a pair of hands, rarely a human being with memories of his own. So he told him. He described his hometown in the Philippines, the narrow streets with sari-sari stores, the laughter of children running barefoot under the hot sun, the Sunday church bells, and the smell of rice cooking every evening. He spoke of his mother, who once sang the same lullaby he had played the night before. He told him about the ocean, the storms, the fiestas, and the long evenings when neighbors gathered outside their homes to share stories, stories that stitched entire communities together. As he spoke, The prince listened closely, his eyes drifting toward the window where the desert light softened into gold. "It sounds like a place," the prince murmured, "where people still recognize each other." Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Highness, where we take care of one another, even when life is difficult." A stillness followed, one of those moments that lingers in the air long after the last word disappears. Then the prince said something Marcus never expected. "I envy that." Coming from a man raised in a world of privilege beyond imagination, the confession carried a weight Marcus felt deep in his chest. The prince had grown up surrounded by wealth, luxury, and power. Yet the simple human warmth Marcus described felt like a distant dream. The prince's voice trembled. "In my world, everyone protects me, but no one stays." The words echoed in the room, settling into a truth neither of them could escape. It was a turning point, not only in the prince's recovery but in Marcus's understanding of why he had been assigned to this case. It wasn't coincidence, it wasn't luck, and it certainly wasn't a random shift on the schedule. Something bigger had placed him there. Over the next few days, Marcus's care deepened, not medically but emotionally. He taught the prince breathing exercises he once showed elderly patients in the barangay, where he volunteered. He shared stories of Filipino families who survived hardship through unity. He played soft songs from Visayas, Luzon, and Mindanao, melodies filled with resilience, faith, and heart. Slowly, the prince began revealing more of himself. Not politics, not palace secrets, but the boy he once was. The young man who felt unseen. The adult carrying responsibilities too heavy for one soul. His recovery, still fragile, began accelerating in ways that surprised the entire medical team. The consultants called it psychological stabilization. The royal advisors called it emotional grounding. But the truth was simpler. Marcus gave him something no one else had dared to offer. Permission to be human, and that changed everything. One night, after the prince drifted to sleep to a soft lullaby, the head physician pulled Marcus aside, his voice unusually gentle. "Nurse Marcus," he said, "I have a difficult question. You may refuse if you wish." Marcus looked up, uneasy. "What is it, doctor?" "The Royal Council wants to meet you." Marcus's heart froze. "The council?" "Yes, they've been observing the prince's progress. A week ago he was declared critical. Now he is stabilizing in ways none of us predicted." Marcus swallowed hard. "Doctor, I was only doing my duty." The physician shook his head. "You are doing more than that, and they know." For the first time since the prince fell ill, Marcus felt a wave of fear. Not for his job, not even for the prince, but because he never imagined that simple acts of compassion could send ripples all the way to the highest levels of the kingdom. "What do they want from me?" Marcus whispered. The physician exhaled. "They want to understand what you did and why it worked." Marcus glanced back at the prince sleeping peacefully, resting with a calm no machine had ever managed to give him. In that moment, Marcus realized something profound. The royal family believed they were about to uncover some secret technique. But what Marcus had given the prince wasn't a technique at all. It was something the world often forgets to measure: humanity. And the meeting waiting just beyond the horizon would show how deeply that truth was about to change everyone involved. The council session was scheduled for late evening, when the palace corridors grew quiet and the hospital's private wing felt more like a sanctuary than a medical ward. Marcus stood outside the conference room, hands trembling despite years of pressure-filled shifts. He had survived life-or-death emergencies, yet this felt different. Tonight he wasn't just a nurse. Tonight he was a mystery the royal family wanted to unravel. When the doors finally opened, he stepped into a solemn, intimidating room. A long table, several council members in traditional garments, quiet advisors taking notes, and at the far end, the prince's personal physician, giving Marcus the only reassuring nod in the room. They didn't begin with accusations, they began with curiosity. One elder council member leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Nurse Marcus," he said, "we have been closely monitoring the prince's condition." One of the elder council members leaned forward, his voice steady but carrying weight. "We were told," he began, "that when the prince reached his weakest point, when medicine was no longer enough, something about your presence shifted his entire path. We wish to understand what you did." Marcus lowered his gaze in respect. "Your Excellencies," he said quietly, "I followed every medical instruction. I administered medication on time, I monitored his vitals. But I know that is not what you are asking. A faint smile tugged at the elder's mouth. "You are correct, we know what the doctors did. We know what the machines did. What we wish to know is what you did that they could not." Marcus hesitated, searching for a way to put something so simple, yet so powerful, into words. "I stayed," he finally said. The room went still. A few council members exchanged surprised glances. "What do you mean you stayed?" another asked. Marcus drew a gentle breath. "When the prince was restless, I didn't simply check on him and leave. When fear crept in, I didn't wait for a new order or a stronger sedative. I held his hand, I spoke to him. I treated him not as royalty, but as a human being who was tired and afraid. I played songs from my homeland that bring comfort to families back home. I opened the curtains when he wanted to see the world. I listened when he needed to talk. I was simply there." A younger council member frowned slightly. "But that is not medicine." Marcus nodded. "But I've learned that sometimes the body refuses to heal when the heart has already surrendered." He paused. "I couldn't give him more life. That is beyond any nurse. But I could give him something that made life worth clinging to." The prince's physician stepped forward, respect in every word. "I witnessed it myself." His Highness responded more to this man's presence than to any sedative. His breathing, his rest, even his clarity, everything improved. "I have practiced medicine for decades, yet this experience reminded me of something I forgot." Another council member, quiet until now, spoke in a deeper voice. "Why you? Why did he respond to you in this way?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He thought of his mother in the Philippines staying up nights beside his grandfather, humming lullabies despite exhaustion. He thought of neighbors supporting each other through illness, of families bringing food and prayers to every doorstep touched by hardship. For his people, caring wasn't a task, it was identity. "Perhaps," Marcus said softly, "because I cared for him the way my people care for family. In my country, we don't leave someone alone when they are sick, especially when they are near the edge. We sit with them, we talk to them. We remind them that they still belong in this world." He swallowed. "I didn't see a prince in that bed. I saw a man who was weary from carrying too much alone." The elder studied him for a long moment. "You are telling us," he said slowly, "that the turning point came not from medicine but from being treated like family." Marcus nodded once. "Yes, Your Excellency." The silence that followed was not hostile. It was thoughtful, heavy with a truth they had never fully considered. Finally, the elder leaned back, a new understanding softening his expression. "For years we have welcomed Filipino nurses and caregivers because of their reputation. Our people praise their patience, their kindness, their devotion. Many households will trust no one else. But this is the first time someone has stood before us and explained why, in such simple, powerful terms." He exhaled. "We were not hiring only their hands. We were hiring their hearts." The meeting ended not with applause but with something deeper. Recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that what had kept the prince alive during his darkest nights was not a drug, not a machine, and not a new treatment. It was a Filipino nurse who refused to let him feel alone. Days passed, then weeks. The prince's strength grew slowly but surely. He sat up longer, spoke without fatigue, and slept peacefully without the nightmares that once tormented him. One golden evening in Riyadh, the prince made an unexpected request. "When I am discharged," he said, "bring Marcus to the palace, not as my nurse, but as my guest." When the day arrived, Marcus walked into the palace with humble steps, heart racing harder than during any emergency shift. He wore his best clothes, simple, neatly pressed, full of quiet pride. The prince sat there, no longer in a hospital gown but dressed in traditional attire, eyes brighter than Marcus had ever seen. Though still healing, something deep within him had changed. When Marcus entered, the prince stood, despite advisors urging him not to. "Marcus," he said warmly. "You came." Marcus bowed. "Your Highness, it is an honor to see you well." The prince walked toward him, each step a testament to the battle he survived. When he reached Marcus, he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He took both of Marcus's hands in his own. "You did something no one else could," the prince said. "You reminded me I was still alive when I had already begun to feel like a shadow. You gave me dignity when I felt like a burden." Marcus shook his head, humbled. "Your Highness, I only did what any Filipino nurse would do." The prince gave a faint smile. "Then your people," he said, "carry a treasure the world has yet to honor properly." In a gesture that palace staff would whisper about for years, The prince presented Marcus with a simple but deeply meaningful gift, a formal commendation bearing the royal seal, honoring the contributions of Filipino caregivers across the kingdom. "This," the prince said, placing the document in Marcus's hands, "is not for you alone. It is for all who leave their homes to heal others, for all who give their hearts when medicine reaches its limits." Marcus accepted the royal commendation with tears quietly forming in his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about millions of Filipinos working overseas, missing birthdays, graduations, Sunday lunches, and the simple noise of home just to send money across oceans. He thought of the mothers who worked double shifts so their children could stay in school, the fathers fixing broken roofs back home with salaries earned in silence, the sons and daughters who wiped the brows of strangers, held hands that weren't their own families, whispered comfort to people they had just met, because they could not physically be with the people they loved. Inside that palace room, for the first time, their sacrifices, usually invisible, were finally honored. When Marcus stepped out of the palace later that day, the warm desert sun touched his face. Something inside him shifted. He had always known his work mattered, but now he carried proof that sometimes the quietest acts of compassion rise higher than anyone expects. And for you listening right now, there's a question lingering quietly in the air. In a world obsessed with status, machines, and power, what truly keeps a person alive when everything else starts to fail? Is it wealth? Is it technology? Is it titles? Or is it the simple, stubborn love of someone who refuses to let you walk through the darkness alone? Because somewhere tonight, a Filipino caregiver is adjusting an elderly patient's pillow, helping them breathe easier, not out of duty, but out of heart. Somewhere across the world, a child is sleeping peacefully because a Filipino nanny hummed a lullaby carried from an island thousands of miles away. Somewhere in a quiet private hospital wing, a patient who owns everything still survives because a Filipino nurse, just like Marcus, understood one truth many forget. Sometimes what saves a life isn't medicine. It's the heart that refuses to let go when everyone else already has. If this story touched something in you, stay with us a little longer. We live in a world filled with headlines about power, conflict, and competition. But stories like this remind us of something far more valuable: that compassion, dignity, and simple human presence can change lives in places we may never see. If you want more stories that honor the quiet heroes of this world, you can join this community by subscribing. It helps these stories reach someone who might need them today. And if you know a Filipino nurse, caregiver, OFW, or anyone working far from home, share this story with them. Let them know that their sacrifices are seen, their kindness is felt, and their work carries a strength many will never fully understand. Thank you for listening, and may this story stay with you long after the final word fades.